Welcome to the Story Nerd Podcast, Hook Your Reader episode. This is where we give authors our professional advice about their query letters and first 10 pages writing samples. My name is Valerie Francis. I'm a writer and story editor, and I teach women who are writing in all genres how stories work so they can finish their books faster and without frustration.
I am Kathleen Fox. I'm a literary agent at the Rice Factory in Toronto and a freelance editor with Fox Editorial.
On today's episode, we're reviewing a fantasy/horror blend from Dale Osterman. It takes a lot of guts for writers to send in their work and have it reviewed so publicly. But you know what? I think it shows that they're willing to step out and bet on themselves. And so Kathleen and I are happy to help. So, Dale, thank you so much for sharing and for giving us all an opportunity to learn. All right, before we get started, as always, we would love it if you could help other writers find our show by leaving a rating and review. For Apple Podcast listeners, just do it from your phone. Scroll to the show's landing page, go to the bottom, click the stars. That's all there is to it. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe button so you never miss an episode. All right, Kathleen, I will read out Dale's query letter and then we'll hear your thoughts. All right,
Sure.
you ready?
Sounds good.
Okay. Dear Agent, and he's written this as a form. So, I mean, obviously he wouldn't just say Dear Agent. We know that. Dear Agent, I'd like to offer my 86,000 word contemporary fantasy horror blend, Missing, for your consideration. An adult novel featuring a teenage protagonist in the vein of Stephen King's fairy tale, it will appeal to fans of Stranger Things and Twin Peaks. Jacob Slade's future isn't bright, but neither is his past. Child of a messy divorce and a religious upbringing, he rebels by burying his feelings beneath a veneer of rationality and an F-off attitude. He dreams of escaping his Midwestern hometown, but with community college as his only prospect, he's lost hope. To make matters worse, he's fallen out with his best friend Emma after a fight instigated by his inability to express himself. The summer before she's supposed to leave for college on the East Coast, Emma, self-destructive, brilliant, full of secrets, disappears. Guilt compels Jake to go after her. The search leads to an abandoned mansion in the forest where he finds a pastor seeking validation over truth, a sheriff ready to kill to keep hidden histories secret, and Emma, poised to break reality for a chance at inner peace. One blood-soaked night shatters Jake's rational worldview. Emma flees the mansion into a shape-shifting dreamscape and unwillingly lets loose a primordial terror. To bring Emma home and save their town, Jake must open his heart and mind, survive mortal danger, and learn to apologize. In doing so, he will discover the truth about Emma's past, a truth that changes how he sees not only her, but himself. I hold an MFA from Southern New Hampshire University, and this is my first novel. It is a standalone with series potential, and I have plans for further works set in the same cosmology. Thank you for your consideration. I would be happy to send the completed manuscript upon your request. Best wishes, Dale. All right, Kathleen, take it away. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So right away, we're getting a lot of good information in this query. Um, the opening paragraph does have strong comps. Now, there are some recommendations to not use big names like Stephen King, because those are very big shoes to fill, which I've mentioned before in previous episodes. But occasionally, if it fits, it fits. So it's not like a hard and fast rule. So these comps immediately gave me that kind of vibe that is fitting for a fantasy/horror. My only question here would be, is it an adult or young adult? Because Stranger Things is technically YA, but plenty of adults watch it. I love it. So yeah, just maybe let us know whether it's adult or YA. One suggestion as well would be to differentiate between the specific elements that you're comparing to in Stranger Things, Twin Peaks, etc. It just helps to, like, it should be kind of an intersection. Like if you're going to use 2 or 3 comps, you should highlight what exactly from those books that is similar to yours. In the first plot paragraph, we're getting some great background information about the protagonist, personality vibes, location. Um, my question there is about the inability to express himself. So immediately my mind goes to, oh, does he have feelings for Emma and he's just not able to express himself and maybe that caused this fight. Um, so if there's any hint of romantic feelings, I would make that clear because that kind of thing raises the stakes immediately. Like if you like someone, great. If you love someone, stakes are instantly higher. Um, Speaking of stakes, the last line, even though I can see the intent to raise the stakes, it's not quite there for me. Um, it's telling us that something big will be revealed that will change everything. It's coming across as vague to me. So, I'm not sure what kind of truth. I'm unsure what direction this is going. So, with some specificity, I can have like a better direction to start theorizing, which is exactly what you want the agents to do, right? You want them to be curious and start theorizing, like, ooh, this is going in XYZ direction. It doesn't matter if they're right or not. The point is they have to be curious about it and thinking about it. Um, so there's a lot happening in the closing paragraph, and I'm really not sure why or how it's happening, right? So where did this shape-shifting dreamscape come from? Is Jake inside this landscape with Emma or trying to fight for her from the outside? What does he need to apologize for exactly? And even about the blood-soaked night, what does that mean? Is it like human blood? Is it creature blood? Like who's killing who? What's happening there? Um, what exactly is after Emma and Jake? So is it some kind of supernatural force and why? Or is it the pastor and the sheriff because they were also mentioned? And what kind of hidden stories are under wraps and why? And I know like there's a lot to cover there in the query, but there does need to be some more details, some more specific details. So my questions are more about understanding more about the story rather than, ooh, I'm curious about this. You know what I mean? So, and there is kind of a fine line there, but if there's too much unknown, then we don't really know what direction the story is going in, and then we don't have that full like that grasp of the story, right? It becomes an endless world of possibilities, and there should be some direction that we can see it going in. And then just the last thing, I would change the last part of the bio to a call to action, which I've talked about before, a question which helps compel the agent to reply. May I send you the full manuscript? And then the contact info, just I noticed that it was in their contact info in brackets. You don't have to put contact info in your query. The agent has everything they need when they get your email, or whether you put it in a form, they just need your email address at this part. So even though it's just a few words, it still can be used to add those details that need to be in the plot paragraphs.
Okay, this is interesting because we have picked up on so many of the same things. So this is great feedback for Dale because it's if we're both picking up on the same thing from two different perspectives, me as an editor and writer and reader, and you as an editor and an agent, then that really lets him know that these are the areas that need to be strengthened a bit. So I just want to say right off the bat, the truth is that if you understand story theory and story structure, this book paragraph, which is, kind of like a back cover blurb, is so much easier to write. I'm just going to put that out there. It's my little plug for understanding story theory yet again. Now, the reason I say that is because as soon as a genre is mentioned, when you understand story theory, you understand that as soon as genre is mentioned, the reader automatically has a set of expectations, no matter how it is they understand genre, because genre is itself, it's a whole other discussion. All right. So in this query letter, Dale says that his book is a fantasy/horror blend. Now, that means, and his comps back this up, that means that the plot is that of a horror story, but there are fantasy elements of some kind. Like it could be a paranormal horror, for example. So far, so good. Now, in a horror story, the antagonist is extremely important. It's got to be an incredibly powerful or sinister or evil, quote unquote, monster of some kind. In horror stories, the antagonists are often more memorable than the protagonists, and they're often known by the antagonist, like Pennywise, right? Pennywise is who we think of. Um, and list your horror story antagonists. Like, that's who we tend to think of first. So likewise, when it comes to protagonists, they tend to be constant characters, not change characters with big internal arcs. And that's because a horror story is very much about the conflict in the external world, not the conflict within the main character. And if you don't know what I mean by constant characters and change characters, go back and listen to the episodes that I could say episode season 16 it is, maybe, I think. Melanie studied that for the whole season. It's really, really cool information. So go back and check those out. Now, in the query, Dale highlights Jake's internal transformation, that he has to open his heart and mind and learn to apologize. Now, this can work. Absolutely, it can work. But Kathleen, I have to be honest, I'm a little nervous now about the story's climax. It's entirely possible that Dale could have nailed this, no problem. But the fact that he's highlighting the main character's internal change rather than the core event of a horror, and in a horror story, it's the hero at the mercy of the monster, and gives me the heebie-jeebies a little bit. All right, anyway, in the book paragraph, the reader, just like your back cover blurb, the reader must have a very clear sense of who the protagonist is, what he wants, what or who is standing in the way of him getting it, and what's at stake if he doesn't get it. And Kathleen, you also mentioned stakes. So from the query, we're told that the protagonist is Jake, and that what he wants is to rescue his best friend Emma, who has disappeared. And the disappearance seems to be the inciting incident of the whole story. So far, so good. However, that feels like the setup for a crime story, not a horror story. So again, my spidey senses are starting to tingle. And then from the first 10 pages, I actually, and Kathleen, you saw this too, I discovered that it's a dual point of view story. And there's no indication of that here in the query. And I'll talk more about that when I get to the opening pages, my comments on the opening pages. So Dale, Kathleen, as you said, he mentions, quote, a pastor seeking validation of truth, and, quote, a sheriff ready to kill to keep hidden history secret, and, quote, a primordial terror. Now, these are the only antagonists referenced. I don't know exactly what a primordial terror is in the context of this story, so that means I don't know how big of a threat it poses. As for the pastor and the sheriff, I assume they are antagonists, but I'm guessing here, and no one should have to guess anything about your story from the query letter, from the book paragraphs in the query letter, or from the back cover blurb. I'm also assuming that the primordial terror is the primary antagonist, but I don't know that for sure, and I don't know how any of them are keeping Jake from finding Emma. So it might be really clear in the manuscript. If I had the whole book to read, it might be super clear and I wouldn't be confused at all. But it should also be really clear here in the book paragraph. So my next question then is, if Jake doesn't find Emma, what's at stake? Well, in a horror story, the stakes are life and death. The quote-unquote monster wants to kill the main character, not for any particular reason, or it's not a personal thing. The monster's just doing what the monster does, right? The monster is a killing machine, whether that is a literal monster or a human behaving in a monstrous way. In action stories and thrillers, the hero wants to save the victim from the villain. So this goes back to genre, and another point where I'm getting a little nervous, because we don't have any indication that the monster, the primordial terror, wants to kill Jake. What we're told is that Jake is trying to save Emma, who is the victim, from the villain, presumably the primordial terror. So what I want to know is this. Is Jake's life in danger? Because it needs to be if this is a horror. Action stories, thrillers, and horror stories all have life and death stakes. And to be perfectly honest, the lines between these genres can get really blurry. That's not a bug. in genre. That's a feature. 'Cause so genre, it's not hard and fast silos, right? That's the beauty of art. Um, but one thing that is distinct between these three genres is the nature of the relationship between the protagonist and the antagonist. So, if Jake is setting out to rescue Emma, and it's Emma's life that's in danger, and I don't know that, it's not clear from the query, then this story is sort of less a horror and maybe more like an action or a thriller. Dale also says that Jake is trying to save their town. Now, where did that come from? Like, save it from what or whom? Like, the nature of that particular threat isn't clear at all. And what happens if Jake is unsuccessful? Like, what happens if he can't bring Emma home? What happens if he can't save the town? Now, neither of these things automatically implies that there are life or death stakes, which you need to have in a horror story. Dale does say that Jake must survive mortal danger. Okay, yes, that's life and death stakes. But Kathleen, I used exactly the same word that you used, which is vague. That's too vague to give me a clear idea of what's actually happening in the story. Also, I'm not as clear as I want to be on what the fantasy elements are in the story. Now, there's a reference to a primordial terror, so like, is that the fantasy element? But I don't know for sure, and I want more specifics about what that is, so that I can be gripped more by the story, so that I'm hooked more. In order to hook your reader, you've got to be specific. So all this to say that I'm a little nervous about whether the genre has been presented accurately. And, other than that Jake is setting out to rescue Emma, I'm not as clear as I should be about what is actually happening in the story I'm about to read. Okay, I had one follow-up question on comps, but you answered it right out of the gate, which is, what are your thoughts about using Stephen King as a comp title? And Stranger Things and Twin Peaks. I mean, huge, huge, huge titles, but you already answered that. All right, Kathleen, why don't you get us started with your thoughts on Dale's first 10 pages writing sample?
Yeah. So it is very clear in the opening pages, or the opening page or two, that there's something bothering Jake, right? He's not very talkative. He's definitely not in the same mindset as the two girls he's with. And the isolated line, "if only," is impactful. He wishes he could get away from his hometown. We're not sure why yet. He's getting high to at least mentally check out for a little bit, so he wants to escape something. It also seems that he knows something about Emma that Nomi and Lex don't, so we can speculate that or about that. Whatever has got him down has something to do with that. Whatever happened between him and Emma, based on his behavior and his unwillingness to talk about her. Near the end of the second page, we get a hint about that speculation. Emma, his best friend, hates him, according to his thoughts, right? But he's still not talking about it. He's like, nope, everything's fine. So he's keeping something inside. So what I was theorizing was correct. It has something to do with Emma. And that's important because when readers have that chance to theorize and they very quickly find out an answer or a piece to the puzzle, it's satisfying in their brain, right? And even if they're not correct with their theory, they're still getting a piece of information, so it's still satisfying. And so that's kind of the beauty of inserting those little bits of curiosity and breadcrumbs, clues and whatnot. I was also curious about the very opening where it reads that these streets that he's walked 1,000 times before are now unfamiliar. So I'm wondering if that's because he's high and he's experiencing them a different way, or are they literally unfamiliar? Is there something else happening there? by the time we get to the bottom of page 4, there's a really great paragraph there, where he's giving human features to this house, I'm assuming is haunted, which is fantastic. It makes it creepier. It almost gives the house its own character and personality, which I love stuff like that. So it's like it's a living, breathing thing. And there's more of that on page 5 as well. So that's fantastic. I thought overall the whole opening scene was done very well in terms of getting that creepy, eerie vibe across. Really great descriptions. And then when we get to the bottom of page 8, Jake has been hearing these whispers that the girls can't hear. He turns and screams. He sees all of these corpses, and he's very descriptive about that. And then there's the man standing there with the knife. The girls scream as well, and I thought that meant that they could see this guy with the knife. But it turns out they can't, and they're just screaming because they don't know what the heck Jake is up to and why he's on the run and telling them to move and get out of the house. And so there's a lot of action going on and a lot of like tense situations. So they get out of the house, they think he's nuts, and then he just brushes it off as, oh, well, I'm high. It's just hallucinations. I think he still thinks there's something going on there, and he's just, on the outside, externally, he's brushing it off so that they don't bug him about it. So there was a lot to like here, lots of action, lots of forward momentum, fantastic descriptions, and I loved the personification of the house. And it is even more creepy to me that Nomi and Lex can't see anything or hear anything that Jake is. So then I'm wondering, well, why him? Is there some kind of ability he has that he doesn't know about, or is whatever's causing it choosing only him to be able to experience that? And so at the very bottom of the 10th page, like things are settled down now, they're out of the house, they're away from immediate danger, and it moves to a new scene. And it's very clear that this is not Jake anymore, it's Emma. So to your point, Valerie, about the query letter, I wondered that as well. That single isolated line in the middle of the plot paragraphs about Emma, to me, because it's isolated in that, I thought it had switched to an Emma point of view. But then that's all we get. So then it goes back to Jake for the rest of the query letter. So I wasn't really sure what was going on, but now it's very clear that it is, in fact, a dual POV novel. So I would make that clear in the query as well. So yeah, we get Emma. She mentions Mark and Cheryl, who'd given her a stuffed rabbit as a child, and I'm wondering if that's her parents, and if so, why is she referring them to by their given name, not their, not dad and mom. She seems almost like wistful or nostalgic, like she feels sad about something. And I found it very interesting that she like takes her finger and pretends to close the stuffed rabbit's eyes like you would see in a TV show or a movie where someone has died. And that's where it ends. So I thought that was interesting, and now I'm curious about that. So in these pages, we get a strong sense of the writing style, and the line level writing is excellent. The vibe, the authorial voice, as well as Jake's voice and a little bit of Emma's as well. We can easily differentiate between him and the girls. The girls, I don't think, are main characters, so that should be the case anyways. Yeah, we're getting all kinds of little tidbits of information just based on his thoughts, choices, responses. We know a lot about his personality at this stage. And it's shown to the reader and not told, right? It's not like the author is saying, is Jake is this way or Jake is that way. It's shown to us based on his thoughts, his movements, his responses, his choices, decisions. So that feels very organic to me. Little bits of curiosity scattered throughout. I'm curious to know what the fight about Emma was about, or not about, the fight with Emma. I'm curious to know what that was about, and why she's decided to hate him. Why he seems to hate his life and he wants to get out of this town. I'm really curious about why he can see and hear these things and the girls he was with could not. It reminded me, so there's a movie called House on Haunted Hill, and it's a horror, and it was like 1999, I think it came out, and there's a scene there where one of the characters goes down into the basement, and I think she's a reporter or something like that. She's got a, you know, a handheld video camera, and uh she's looking through it, enters this room, looks up, and there's nothing there. It's just a dark, weird kind of operating room. She looks through the lens of her video camera and she sees doctors, like, you know, 30s, 40s style. And she looks up and there's nothing there. And she looks back down and they're looking at her and coming at her. And that's like the most intense scene to me. Like the fact that, you know, are they actually there? Are they not there? Are they real? Are they not real? And that kind of reminded me of this. So I kind of got that goosebumpy kind of feeling, which is excellent. So like descriptions are perfect. Lots of good things happening in these pages.
So yes to everything you said. Dale's line writing is very good, and he should know that. I am sure he already knows that. He's got an MFA. That's what the MFA is focused on. So I'm not going to articulate all of the great line writing stuff that Dale does, because Kathleen just did a whole bunch of that. Two, I'm sure Dale already knows it. And those of you on my mailing list have a copy of this. It goes out in the email that I send out when the episode airs. So if you read it for yourself, you're going to see that it's great line writing. Okay, so here are other than that, here are my thoughts on the opening pages. So Dale uses, the exposition is really well done here. He uses a little trick that's particularly popular right now because it works, and it's kind of like a hack that writers use. I hate that word hack. But Kathleen, I am really curious to know if I'm going to start hearing agents moan about this, because it happens so often that you get tired when you're looking at as many manuscripts as an agent does. It just gets tired when you see the same thing over and over and over. As a reader, I'm seeing this a lot in books, just in the bookstore. And that's just the books that made it all the way through the system. It's a small fraction of the books that actually were sent out to be queried. So here's the little hack that works, but I'm putting an asterisk by it because it's so popular. I'm going to challenge writers to find another way to do it. And that is this. He's got the date at the top of the page, Saturday, July 7th, 2012. So we know when we are. That's a piece of exposition. You'll often also see the place there, you know, at the beginning, so that right off the bat, the writer has let the reader know where and when we are. Now, this turns out to be the date for Emma's diary entry, but we don't know that initially. A few lines later, we're told that the story is taking place in Glade, Illinois. Awesome. And it's so seamless. It just comes up so naturally. The characters, there's only 4 in these opening pages. They're all naturally introduced. Yes, there's reference to the other 2 who I assumed also were mother and father. Let's see. At the top of page 2, we get an indication of the character's age. And we know this because it says that Emma has gotten into Brown University. So since this is a friend group, they're probably all around 18, right? And there's also a reference to leaving Glade High. So seamlessly letting us know the ages of these characters. So excellent work with the exposition. Like I said, the line writing is great, but that is what I would expect from someone with an MFA. And it's because Dale's line writing is already so strong that I'm going to challenge him to level up in a couple of areas. And it might seem like I'm being super picky here, but I promise you, this is the kind of thing that Dale can easily handle. Absolutely. All right. Earlier, I said that from the query letter, I expected a single point of view story. Jake is the protagonist, so I expected either a first person or a close third person narrative. So when I read the opening lines, tonight, it's time. Those are written as 2 sentences. Tonight, it's time. I assumed this was Jake talking, or rather Jake thinking, because it's written in italics, which indicates free and direct style, right? It indicates, typically italics in prose indicates that the character is thinking those words. Now, it's only when I got to page 10 that I realized that there are 2 points of view, Jake and Emma, and that these words, "tonight it's time," are not Jake's thoughts at all, but rather the words that Emma is writing in her journal. So then I was a bit confused because I had read everything that came before it as though Jake had been thinking, "tonight it's time." So, Dale, I think you've got to, one, like Kathleen said, indicate that there's a dual POV, that this is a dual POV story, indicate that in the query. And two, clearly indicate that the story is opening with Emma writing these words in her journal. Now, there's a challenge with that because someone sitting around writing words down in a journal is not particularly compelling. It's not the type of thing that's going to grab a reader and make them read on. Now, of course, it depends what it is that they're writing and why they are writing it. And those two things, what they're writing and why they are writing it, have to be conveyed immediately for that act of writing to be interesting. Otherwise, it's a bit like opening a story with someone who's just sitting and thinking. It's boring because there's no real action. It's not the type of thing that in and of itself is going to hook a reader. Okay, right after these opening lines, we have the sentence, "The night was warm, comma, and Jake was high." This is a passive sentence. Now, there's nothing wrong with passive sentences, contrary to what most people will have you believe. Passive voice has its place, and sometimes it's exactly the right choice. However, I don't think the right place and the right time is the opening lines of a novel, especially a horror or thriller or action, whatever this actually turns out to be. The reason is because a horror story is an active genre. As such, the reader expects action from the protagonist and from the narrative. Now, this idea of, quote unquote action is also misinterpreted much of the time. And it means that writers will open books with, over the top action scenes that might not have anything to do with the story that follows. So action simply means that the character is active. You can think of it as them being proactive. They're in motion. They're doing something, no matter how big or small it is. You could argue that writing in a journal is action, but it's not action for the purposes of story. And opening with "the night was warm, Jake was high" is a passive sentence, is passive language, and you need active language to really compel a reader to keep reading. Further to that, for the first 3 pages, Jake is not very active at all. Think of an agent who has 500 queries in their inbox, and they got to get through them because they're looking for clients. And they're looking for needles in haystacks all the time. And they desperately want every query that they open to knock their socks off. And they only have so much time to devote to each query because they're reading this stuff typically outside, office hours. But I suspect, Kathleen, that agents kind of have the same office hours as writers do, which is from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed.
Yes.
But you're not earning any money going through queries. So you're kind of just doing them on your lunch break or saying, "I'm going to take an hour now on Friday afternoon before I clock off for the day and try to have a life to read through a few queries." With that volume of books to read, queries to read, and again, I'm guessing, you correct me if I'm wrong, you just can't stick with a story when nothing is happening for 3 or 4 pages because that gives you an idea. Like there's nothing there to make you think, "Oh, well, the first 3 or 4 pages, nothing's happening. It's going to get better." You're going to move on to the next one, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm.
Just like a book buyer in the bookstore has thousands of books to choose from just right there in that one bookstore. If they pick one up and start reading the first chapter, if there's nothing there to grab them, they just close the book and pick up the next book. If they're going through the horror section, there's easily, conservatively, 500 different books they could choose from. So am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I often hear some writers say something to the effect of the story really gets going in chapter 3. The problem is I'm not going to get to chapter 3 if I can't get through chapter 1 and 2, right? So
Right,
because I just don't have the time to do that. Your story has to hook me right from the get-go.
right. And a really great exercise. And it's hard for writers to accept this because we are pouring our blood, sweat, and tears into our books. And because it's so important to us, we forget that it's not as important to everybody else on the planet. It's not even that important to our friends and family most of the time. Although they support us and they love us, they don't lie awake at night wondering how our book is going, right? They're busy with their own lives. So, a really great exercise is to go into the bookstore and just start picking up books and reading the opening chapters and seeing if you are hooked or not. And it starts to give you a that's not a real one-to-one, it's not an apples to apples example, but it gives you at least a taste of what's going on. Um, so in the first 3 pages, Jake is not very active at all. He is mostly a passive character, which is a problem in a horror where you need an active protagonist. It's not until they go into the house that he starts to experience the supernatural, or at least I assume it's the supernatural and not a figment of his imagination because he's so high. Yeah, from the bottom of page 5 onward, Jake is absolutely becoming more active, no doubt about it. But my concern is that that's a bit too late. Like, if I was an agent, if I wasn't hooked by the 3rd page, I would have to move on to the next one just because I have so many to go through. Um, in the opening pages, my attention was much more on Nomi because she is the most active character. And I'm not even sure if she stays in the rest of the book. Like, do Nomi and Lex go with Jake as he attempts to rescue Emma? I don't know. So if she doesn't go on the adventure with him, that's a real problem because I was far more concerned with, not concerned with, far more interested in Nomi than Jake in these pages. The other thing that I recommend that you work on, Dale, is creating working scenes. Now, that's a whole other topic that I don't have time to get into right now. But if you just make Jake active, it's going to help a lot um, to 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 make those opening pages more compelling. Your line writing is right on the money. What you've got to work on, in my opinion, is the overall story structure and making sure the story as a whole works. And this is really common with the MFA grads that I have worked with. A lot of my clients have been MFA grads, a lot. And their line writing, I mean, just knock your socks off. But they don't know how stories work as a whole. So work on that. And we've got, 200 and some odd episodes here of the podcast where you can go back and start listening to those. That'll get your feet wet. And, I'm developing some online courses if you're interested in those. As they become available, I will let you know. Kathleen, what's your final advice for Dale?
Um, Definitely lots to like here, like we've mentioned. I I do I think the opening could use a little bit of work because, all of the things that you were saying. I I think he could easily cut out like the first 3 pages and start when they get to the house. Start when there's something really interesting happening, right? They're walking the streets, it's nighttime, they're just kind of, joking around and stuff. And there's little tidbits in there that you can keep and you can feed in, at the right time. But I think truly the most interesting part of the opening scene is when they get to the house. Um, so, like uh, he could say something to the effect of, it's been said that this house was haunted. I don't know if it's haunted or not, maybe there's a myth or a legend around it. It's been said that this house was haunted, but Jake didn't believe it. He's never ventured in, but standing on the precipice of this new stage of life, right? It was expected that he goes in there. All the grads did it. So, he's got to do the same thing. He wasn't scared, and neither were the two girls he was with. He just wishes Emma was there. So that's bringing in that aspect. And it was the whispers that drew him in, or, and then came the whispers, or something where something is happening right away, and getting us into that house faster, and moving up that really, really great paragraph. I think I said it was on page 4, where there's lots of, it's personification of the house. That's fantastic. So yeah, that would be my main thing about the pages. And then in terms of the query, make sure that you state that it's dual POV, add some specificity, and make sure those stakes are as high as you can possibly make them.
We're both suckers for haunted house stories. So
yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
All right, that wraps it up for this week. If you want us to look at your work, visit storynerd.ca for all the details about how to submit. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. And if you are watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. To get copies of the query letters and writing samples we feature here on the show, join my inner circle at valeriefrancis.ca/inner circle. And to find out more about Kathleen's agent wish list or what services she offers as an editor, visit KathleenFoxAgent.com and FoxEditorial.com. And that's Fox with 2 X's. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.